to the organizers, it says that screen sharing is disabled for me.
Sorry, what's wrong?
Screen shared is disabled for me.
Oh no.
It says that only organizers can share their screen.
Oh no. I think maybe Aris has to make you an organizer then, or just give me a second. Let me speak to him.
Okay. Pause for a second here. Tech issues. That's the fun part of like doing things remote, is getting to navigate technology all the time.
I'm sorry you have to wait, but I'm trying to get him on the phone and he's not picking up. But I've sent a message as well, so bear with me. Apologies for that.
It's okay.
Sorry,
Can you make me is it possible to make me a co-host?
Yeah, I mean, I can try.
Okay.
Okay. Do we know?
Is everything
I'm not
okay?
using Zoom.
Is it
So
okay?
do we know?
Screen shared is disabled. It says
Okay.
that.
Okay, here you go.
Cool. There we go. Cool.
Can everybody else mute?
So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Amplify Studio to build a vacation rental site. So something similar to like Airbnb or Vrbo or one of those types of things. So I'm going to head to sandbox.amplifyapp.com to get started. And right on here, you'll be able to make a data model. So there's a quick start. You can kind of choose what type of app you want to build. So I'm going to start with a blank data model, but know that you can also start with a blog instead if you wanted. And I'm going to build a React application. So then I'll click get started, and you can follow along with me again. Sandbox.amplifyapp.com is where to get started with all of this. And this is a sandbox environment which allows you to test out Amplify's data modeling without needing to create an AWS account yet. So you can try this out in your local environment. You can play around, change your data model as needed, but you don't need to worry about deployment or like racking up charges or anything like that, because you're not connected to the cloud. You're not even creating a database yet. So I'll create some data models here, and I'm going to create a rental, and it'll have an ID, a name, an image, a price, and a location. And you can choose the different data types for this. So I'm going to choose integer for the price here, and I can also make different fields required. So maybe I'll make it so that name is required and the location and the price. I can also add multiple models and add relationships between them. Just since we're getting started right here, I'll create one, but just know that you could create a second model, maybe a trip, for example, like with different rentals, you'd have different trips associated with them. And then you could have a relationship there. So each rental would have many trips. So you'd have a one-to-many relationship, or you could have a many-to-many relationship. Say that there are different owners for the rentals, and there can be multiple owners, and each owner can have multiple rentals. That could be a many there. You could also have a one-to-one field. So we might want to put price in a separate model. Then we could have a one-to-one relationship in between the two. So you can do all of that through this visual interface. And then I'm going to go to next, deploy or test in your app, and you can create a React app, test this out, and pull your sandbox ID, and you can test this all out locally without an AWS account. I'm going to skip directly to a deployment to get that process up and running, but just know that you can actually do this locally without needing to create an AWS account yet. So I'm going to go ahead and click deploy to AWS. I do have an AWS account. I do work for them, so I have one created, but if you don't have one created yet, go ahead and do that. So I'm going to log in here. Then try again. I have a different way of signing in because I'm an employee. So I'm going to name this City.js rental app. And you'll also choose a deployment region. So if you're not familiar with the idea of regions, essentially they're an area in which to primarily deploy your application. So you want to choose the one that's closest to your end users or really just yourself if you're developing this. So I'm going to go with US West 2 for today. Then I'll click confirm deployment. This will take a couple of minutes to deploy. So if anybody has any questions while I'm doing that, I can try and answer those for you. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some boilerplate running through my local environment too. So right now, some of the visual tooling that I'm going to demo works only with React. So I'm going to create a React app. Everything that I've shown so far works with any front end or mobile framework. So JavaScript, React, Vue, then there's Android, iOS, Flutter, React Native. So everything that I've shown before is completely compatible with all of those things. So I'm going to do npx create React app, City.js rental site. And now I have two different processes running. So I've doubled the pause. So again, if anybody has any questions about Amplify, about web development, feel free to ask. Okay, so my deployment was just successful for AWS. So I'm going to go ahead and go in and launch Studio. So once you're in Studio, you'll see that you have a bunch of different options on the left-hand side. And the first one is data. And my data model is still being deployed, but once it's deployed, I'll have that rental data model that I created before right in here, and I can update that. So if I wanted to change a field or a field type, I could do that right in here. I could even add another model as well and then redeploy. There's also authentication, storage, functions. Some of these will just be through the Amplify command line interface. So this is Amplify Studio. It's the visual interface for all of this, but you can also go directly through the command line. So I know a lot of developers are more comfortable in the command line, and that's awesome. Everything works through there as well. And anything you do through the command line is backwards compatible with Amplify Studio. So frontwards and backwards compatible. You do something through the command line interface, it'll be synced to here and vice versa. There is also storage here. So I could deploy authentication, which I can go ahead and do later in this workshop. I'm going to pause on that for now. The same thing with storage. So if I wanted to upload an image or a video or something along those lines, I could do that through here. Once we're done deploying, there will also be this content tab, and this will be a lightweight CMS where I can add new rentals and all that. I know when I was a software engineer, which I was for a long time, I would oftentimes have to create one end application for the end users of the site. So the customers of the person I was building the app for, but we'd also need some sort of administrative console too, so that super users could go in and modify data in that way. And this actually does that all for you, so you don't need to do that dual application type thing. And the same thing exists for user management and file browser as well. And it's still deploying. That's always the fun part of live demos is build times. But another thing that I'm going to show you is this UI library. So this is my favorite new feature, and it allows us to go directly from design to front-end code. So Figma is a very popular design software. In fact, I think a lot of front-end developers have used it, at least to some extent. Maybe it's just your designer handing something off to you through Figma, but it's a really cool piece of design software. But then the developer normally has to implement the design in code. So they have to write all the React code from scratch. And what this does for you is it pre-generates human readable React code from that Figma design. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to this content tab though first, now that my application deployed, and I'm going to create some rentals. And yeah, that's the data tab that I was talking about, that you can look at and see your data right in here and go deploy there too. Content tab. Come on, content tab, you got this. Huh, interesting. Okay. I am going to then it says I'm like in private mode, which I don't think I am, but interesting. I'm going to go in and then add the UI stuff. So I'm going to go in here, the Figma Amplify UI kit. And I'm going to duplicate this file here. I'm going to relog in with my personal Figma here. Cool. So I will go ahead and duplicate this file. And within here, once I have it duplicated, there is a big README about Amplify Studio and the Figma file and how to use all this, which is super helpful. But then you go to this primitives page, and it has a bunch of the Amplify primitives. So the buttons and the alerts and the password fields and the text fields, all these different components that you might need for your application. So lots of different visual things here. And then you go down to my components, and this has them put together. And you can completely customize this yourself. So you can change the styling, you can change and add different primitives to these. So you could add a button to this card, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, let's see, which card do I want to choose today? I'm going to go with this one right here. So I'm going to modify this a little bit. I am going to round the corners a little bit. I like the corners to be a little bit rounded. So within Figma, you can do all these types of visual things. So I'll make that even more rounded to make it more obvious. Cool. So now my corners on my card are rounded. I'm going to do the same for the image as well. Figma is my thing that I'm still working on learning right now. So forgive me if this part's a little bit more slow. I'm definitely a designer, definitely a developer, not a designer. So I'm going to click on this card B again. And I'm going to remove this background color. So right now you can see that there's like a white background on the card, and I'm going to remove that just so it's a transparent background. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So I'll remove the fill on that. Okay, so now I'm going to copy the URL of this Figma file and go back into Amplify Studio. Once in here, I can paste in my Figma link and then click continue. Allow access. There we go. And then fetching from Figma. So I just had to sign into my Figma account. And one thing is that this is in developer preview, the UI library, the backend is not. And so this is very flexible. If you have feedback, please, please, please give it, because we're still working on this. It's not generally available yet. It's more for something to preview and test out. So now you can go in and accept or reject your different components. So I'm just gonna accept them. And you can see that this is the one that I modified. So the corners are now rounded, doesn't have the background anymore. And then I'll just do accept all instead, so I don't have to click through all of these. I'm gonna go back and see if the content tab is working now. I'll also open this in another browser window because it said I was in private mode. So I'm hoping that actually not. Okay, well, I'm definitely not in incognito mode, and I think that's what is going on there. So I'm gonna tell the PMs about this afterwards. Gotta love the demo gremlins, they always come out. So I'm gonna go back to my UI library now, and I'll go into that card B, which is the one that I edited, and I'm going to go ahead and configure this. So I click that like little settings button there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass some data to this component. So in React, you have props, and props are how you pass data from one component to another, normally the parent component to the child component. And so I am going to pass a prop into this component, kind of like code, but visually. So I'm going to name that prop, and I'll do rental. And right now, the default data type is a string, but I actually want it to be the data type of my rental model. Then I'm going to go in and I am going to make these dynamic. So instead of using the hard-coded versions that are here, I'm going to bind data to here. So I'm going to click on this image, and I'm going to set the image source to be the rental image. So now I will use the image from my rental. And we're having this fun issue with the data sync, so it's not working. Let me see real quick if I can find one of my PMs and see if this is not working. Going to hard reload this and see if that fixes it. Empty cache and hard reload. We'll see. Then also application and IndexedDB. Let me see. I'm going to just try opening a new Chrome instance and see if it's just my computer being super weird right now, because that is very much a possibility. Always fun. Live demos, they always get you. The little gremlins come out. I promise this is a very cool feature when it works though. What I'm going to go ahead and do is do this a little differently. I'm going to go local first. So I said a little bit earlier that this works both if you go through the command line interface or if you go through Amplify Studio. So we're just going to do more locally instead of through Amplify Studio. So I'm going to go in here and click the local setup instructions right here. And I call this part copy and paste driven development because you're able to just copy and paste things down. So I'm going to paste this. And run it. And it's going to ask me to log in. I'll choose VS Code, JavaScript, React, source build, and run script build, run script start. And this will generate some UI components for me. It'll also generate my backend. So I'll show you the files that are generated when this happens. And I think I said this before I was live streaming, but similar to like Ruby on Rails, where you ran a code generation script and it would create all your base files for you. This does something like that. So it's kind of like that whole code generation era there. It's super nice as a developer that you don't have to write all the boring stuff. That's the thing that I'm most excited about with low code, is that we don't necessarily need to write the boring stuff anymore. We can focus on the heavy business logic that makes our applications unique, rather than focusing too much on the stuff that we've done over and over again, like forms. So once I pulled this down, there is this models directory here, and this has my rental right here, and then my schema as well. So you can see the rental right here, and then also the different fields that I have on my rental. So the ID, name, image, price, and then also all of these UI components. So this card B component, for example, this is the one that I updated, and you can even see that it has the border radius bumped because I did that in Figma. And so all the things that I do within Figma are going to be reflected within my code. And this looks like React code that a human would write. It's not like all smushed together or anything like that. It's all normal human readable code. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to integrate this into my own application. I am going to go ahead and also install the Amplify libraries and React components. So npm I AWS Amplify, AWS Amplify UI React, and I'll let those run right there. The next thing that I'm going to do is go into my index.js, and I'm going to do some configuration within here. So I'll import config from AWS exports. So AWS exports is another file that is generated. It has the GraphQL endpoint. So under the hood, the data schema or the data model that I created is using a GraphQL schema. So if I go into my API, there's the schema.graphql file, which has this in GraphQL too, which is really cool that it can generate this for you. And the other really cool thing about the data is that it's going to be offline, online compatible, and it's going to sync automatically for you. So you don't need to write that online, offline logic for yourself. It's going to be in IndexedDB, which is similar to like local storage or session storage, and allow you to have that data on the device for the user and also sync to the cloud. Okay, so I imported that AWS exports file, and then I'm going to run import Amplify from AWS Amplify, and then I'm going to run Amplify configure config. So this will tie my front end to my back end, tell all these UI components that I'm using that, hey, this is where my GraphQL API is. Here's how to pull data from it. So I'm going to now go into my app.js file. And I will clear out a lot of the stuff that's in here already. So I can remove that CSS file there, and then also all the content within here. And I'm going to import the Amplify provider component. Actually, I'm going to do this in my index.js. So I'm going to move this back into here. So the Amplify provider component is similar to if you've ever used like Chakra UI, where it is a React component that passes CSS to your components. So it just makes it so that any child of it is going to have the Amplify styling applied to it. So I'm going to do the Amplify provider here. And then I'm also going to import the CSS file. And then within here, I'm going to go ahead and import one of those components that I generated. So those UI components, I'll use that card B at first. So I will go ahead and do card B. Don't you love IntelliSense from VS Code? That auto import is so nice. I'm going to also run my local React server. Cool. So now you can see that my component is kind of loading on the page here. We have the outline of the component there, and then the pricing and the square feet, and then the address as well. So with Amplify, you can also do full data authentication and storage as well. So let's just go ahead and show authentication. So if I go back into Studio, I'm going to do this. So I'm going to go to the authentication and click deploy. You can also set up like multi-factor authentication, password protection, verification, and the type of login mechanism that you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm deployment. And so that'll take a couple minutes there. So now authentication is being deployed here. If anybody has any questions, I can try to answer them while this deploys. So in my local application, I can do things like queries as well. So that's not what I wanted. If I go in here, I could, for example, set up a query that pulls all of my data with on page load. So I'll import data store here. Then I'll also import use effect from React. So I'll create a use effect. Does anybody still, all these years later, sometimes forget that array is the second argument to a use effect? I sometimes do. So I'm going to create this pull data function. And then do pull data async. And then my rental model, which I will import from my model. So okay, even weirder. So this isn't working at all. Data store is just not behaving with me right now. Let me see if I can get this working in Firefox. Okay, so you can see that I got an empty array because I don't have data set up. I'm going to go try Amplify Studio within Firefox 2 right now. We'll go to Amplify here. And I'll go to US West 2. My rental app, launch Studio. And I never used Firefox, so I've got all sorts of weird settings on here. Okay, so I'm going to go into my content tab here, and now it works. So it must be just Chrome is not working for me right now. I must have some weird setting on my machine. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rental. So I will go ahead and call this like House by the Beach. And then I'm going to go to Unsplash. And I'll go get a vacation house. Copy the link to that. And then the price. So maybe $200 a night, fancy house. And then where's Miami, Florida? There we go. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go back to that UI library tab. So now I can really edit my card B here. I'm gonna refresh my page real quick. So I'm going to configure this component. And you can see that my image is already showing up because I already set that. And I'm going to change this to be the text label. So the rental's name, House by the Beach. And then I will set the text label here to be the rental price. Actually, I'm going to concatenate this. So right now it just says like 200, and I'm going to add a value here. So I'm going to do a $sign right here, constant, and then add the rental price. And then I'm also going to add per night as a constant value as well. And then here is going to be the rental location. So it says Miami, Florida. I also want to create a collection of these. So I only have one item in my database right now, but I'm going to call this rental collection. And I have the option to add a search and pagination, and I can also change the way that the collection is displayed. So do a grid, I could do a direction, I can add padding between them, so maybe like a 5-pixel padding. Actually, why don't I go create another house here? I used that previous image, so instead of going and searching for a new one, I just use the same one. And now I have my rental collection, so I'm going to go into that and I'll configure this. And you can see that I can change this to like a grid. I can change this to left to right or right to left. I can also edit the record. So I can add in, for example, a sort, and I can do ascending based off of price, for example. I can also filter, so only certain records are included. So I think if this is really helpful for something like a blog where you only want the published posts to be shown. You can add a filter so that only ones with published set to true are displayed on the page. So I'll create that data set. And then I'm going to rerun that amplify pull command. So this is kind of like a Git-ish workflow where you run pull to sync anything locally, run push to deploy anything that you do locally to your code. So I'm going to run amplify pull right there. Again. And my dog is eating my leftover lunch in the background. So if anybody hears anything, it is that. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my local code here, and you can see that now that array of items that I made render on the page with that data store query now has my live data. So I have 2 different items instead of just having an empty array. So you can run a data store query just like I did right here. And so instead of doing the part B, I'm going to change this out for the rental collection. I'm going to do that rental collection right there, render that. Let me see, did I mess this up? Where's the rental collection here? I need the curlies. Let me see. Okay, so now you can see that my real items with my real data are rendering on the page. So I have this rendered right here. I've got my house by the beach and my city house, both of them showing up on the page. So I can now modify this within my own code. So I don't necessarily need to go back to Figma if I don't want to, but I can. So at any point I can go back to the Figma file, edit anything in there, resync that Figma file, and then rerun Amplify pull to get any updated user interface things into my application, or I can also modify through props. So if I wanted to make it so that this border radius wasn't 15 pixels anymore, I could do that straight through React code. You can also go into the child components as well. So I have this collection here that's a list. I can modify this to be a different type of collection instead. So I can go in, for example, to my app.js and change the type to a grid. You can see it like shifted a little bit there. And if you ever want to see what props are modifiable, you can go to ui.docs.amplify.ews. And you can see all the instructions here. So these UI components that I'm using can be used outside of Amplify or not outside of Amplify, but outside of Studio as well. So if you just want a UI library for your application, you can use this as well. So they have different examples here, and then also you can go into components and see the different props that you can pass in. So you can, for example, go to a collection and you can see the different props that can be passed in order to modify a collection. And you can see that there's align items, for example, or direction or gap. I'm also going to use this opportunity to load the CSS file in as well. So I'm going to go into my app.css and import the CSS font. You have to do that manually. Wait, I copied and pasted the wrong thing. Like getting started, I think. Yes, here it is. There we go. Actually, I deleted that import. I need to do it within the index CSS instead. Okay, so now I've got the prettier font than the system default there. So I also enabled authentication. So I enabled that through Studio as well. Then I cloned it down, and now I want to add authentication flows to my application. So I'm going to go back into my app.js here. And I'm going to import with Authenticator. Some of these Amplify snippets are a little funny. Okay. Okay, so I imported with Authenticator. And that's actually not the right import either, from AWS Amplify UI React. And then I'm going to do with Authenticator app. So it's a higher order component. So I will wrap my app component in there. And this will make it so that I have to sign in to get to my application. So maybe you want this on a different page instead. So the home page you can just go into as any user, but maybe say that you want to make a user sign in order to create a new item or something like that. You could add an authentication component to a different page, just wrap the with Authenticator around that page's component instead. You can also use the Authenticator component in order to customize this flow more as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create an account. And the default is a pretty strict password, so I have to remember that. It's going to send a login to my email. Which I have in my other, on my other monitor so that you all don't have to look at my email. So I just got an authentication code in my email there and I can prove that here. So right here, got this verification code in my email, pasted it in and confirm. And now that I'm logged in, I can view my site. I can also add in like login, log out buttons, all of those types of things if I want them. And you can read more about the authentication flows again within that ui.docs.amplify.aws. That has all the information about the with authenticator and also the authenticator component. So if you just go to Amplify UI components, authenticator is right here. Okay, so far we have enabled data for our application. We have also used the UI component flow in order to add UI components and then also added an authentication flow. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. So AWS Amplify also has a fully managed authentication service. And all that I need to do is push this to a GitHub repository. So I'm going to go ahead and go to GitHub and create a new repo. And I am going to call this City.js rental app. Create that repository. And I'll copy and paste all this stuff. Again, I like this copy and paste driven development. We're doing kind of something similar here. Oh, you know what? It gave me, it should be SSH. There we go. Okay, and so now my application is pushed. I'm going to go back into the Amplify console. And then I'm going to choose a hosting environment. So I'm going to import this from GitHub and connect a branch. And I'll choose, we got lots of flashing going on here. I'm going to go in and choose my City.js rental app and main. And I'm going to stick with my app here, and I'm also going to enable the full stack CI/CD here. So every time I continuously deploy front end and back end changes, then this will redeploy as well. So if I push to GitHub, it'll redeploy. I'm going to go staging here and save and deploy. And just like that, this will go ahead and deploy for me. I'm going to check again for questions. So anybody have questions? Oh, I do see one in the chat. So the backend is Node.js. So the backend is managed for you. So it's a serverless backend, and it's using the AWS service AppSync for the GraphQL layer. So I kind of showed that there was this GraphQL file generated here, schema.graphql. So under the HUD, this data model that I've been using is GraphQL. And so that is what's being used for the GraphQL layer. And then there's also a database layer, and that is DynamoDB. As far as authentication goes, the backend for that is Amazon Cognito, which is a managed authentication service. And so that's what's going on under the hood here. Is it's kind of abstracted away from you, but you are using the power of these AWS services without needing to have super deep cloud knowledge yourself, which is super nice for front-end developers like me, where I can use like things like S3 pretty confidently. And I can use a lot more now that I work for AWS, but I don't necessarily have as deep of cloud knowledge as maybe somebody who does like DevOps for their full-time job. Anybody else have questions? If you're watching the live stream on Twitter or something like that, you can respond to the tweet and I will be checking that too. Or you can use the Zoom chat if you're watching on Zoom too. Now we're building again. So again, to learn more about most of this, you can go to ui.docs.amplify.aws. So I have all the information about the UI components. And those are also available in Angular and Vue and Flutter as well, although they're more limited for that. So the UI primitives, the like buttons and things like that, those are for React, but then the authenticator component that we use is available in those other frameworks as well. There's also docs.amplify.aws, and this will have more information about like the Studio backend and the libraries and hosting and all that as well. So those are two great places. And the place that we started was sandbox.amplifyapp.com. And so that's where I would recommend to scaffold your data schema before having to deploy it to the cloud. So those are the three places that I would recommend getting started with Amplify. I also have my own blog. It's welearncode.com, and that has a lot of information about Amplify as well, lots of tutorials. So this is still building, but eventually my app will be right here once my deployment completes. And then anytime I push to GitHub, my front end is going to redeploy. So anytime I push to that main branch, it's going to redeploy. I can also set up things like pull request previews. So every time somebody creates a pull request, branch deployment is created as well to preview that. You can do that right over here in previews. You can also set up notifications so you get emails when your app rebuilds or fails or anything like that. And then there is also Amplify Studio settings. So this is for the backend portion of Studio, but this is really nice because you only need to have one AWS account for Amplify Studio application. You can invite other users to it. So if I want to give another developer on my team full access, I can just enter in their email and they can get access to it through that. There's also manage only access. So if you have somebody like a content editor that you want to be able to add content, but you don't want them to be able to change the database schema, you can give them manage only access as well. So that's a little bit what's going on the side there. This is still building, but it will deploy and then my React app will be live in the world. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. This has been Fun, thanks for bearing with me through the first Zoom issues and then the weird Chrome issues. So thanks again. This was really fun. Have a good one. Hey, organizers, anything that you all need from me before I sign off? Hey, Raina, I finished, so I think we're good.
Shall I end the Zoom call?
Yep, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. Thanks.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.